Have you ever wondered what really happens during the final 24 hours of a death row inmate's life? It's a process that's just shrouded in procedure, ritual, and, some really intense emotion. Okay, let's dive into this and break down that final countdown basically minute by minute. So to start, let's look at a number. At the time our source material was published, there were 2,738 inmates on death row, right here in the United States. Now, of course, that number is always changing. Sentences get commuted, new inmates arrive, and, well, executions are carried out. And who are these people? When you look at the demographics, they're pretty stark. The population is almost an even split between white and black inmates. We're talking 42% and 41%. Then you have Latino inmates making up 13%, and get this, only 2% of the entire death row population are women. Now, here's a number that might actually surprise you. The average time an inmate spends on death row, from the moment the judge hands down the sentence to the actual day of execution, is 20 years. Think about that. 2 entire decades spent waiting. But after all those years, a final day does arrive. And so we're going to move from those broad statistics to the personal, minute-by-minute experience of an inmate's last day. The final countdown is officially on. So how does this all play out? Well, it's a very, very structured day. It actually starts the evening before at 8 p.m. with a transfer. Then it moves to a 4:30 a.m. wake-up call, the famous last meal around 4 in the afternoon, and finally the execution itself, which is usually in the early evening.
At 8 p.m., the inmate is taken from the cell that's been their home for years, sometimes decades. They go through a really thorough search and are put in a transport van. One guard we read about described the vibe in that van as incredibly solemn. He said, "We all knew where we were going and why. Nobody said a whole lot." You can just imagine the tension is sky high.
So once they get to this death house, the inmate is immediately placed on what's called death watch. And what that means is they are under constant, direct surveillance. And the main reason for this is to stop the inmate from committing suicide. Now, this is where it gets really interesting. We came across the diary of a prisoner, and the contrast he describes is just fascinating. He said his old cell was like going on safari because of all the bugs, but the death house cell, spotless, not a bug in sight. He's even given smarter clothes, trousers with a button and a zip, which is a tiny detail, but a huge change from the standard prison uniform. And this perfectly captures the strange reality of death watch. That same inmate, watching his own guards kind of doze off, wrote this incredibly poignant line in his diary. In those final hours, you can get this weird reversal of roles. Okay, so the night is over. Let's move into the morning of the execution. This is a time for those last human connections, but it's also when the machinery of the state really kicks into its final gear. The day starts, and it starts brutally early with a 4:30 a.m. wake-up call. The inmate gets a few hours for final visits with family, but all contact is cut off sharp at 8 a.m. A chaplain is there for support, and guards will literally dial the phone for them from a pre-approved list. It's a very scheduled morning of goodbyes. And get this, while these intensely personal moments are happening, a completely different kind of preparation is going on just a few feet away. Staff are methodically testing all the execution equipment. They're checking gurney straps, the electrical chair components, and even the direct phone line to the governor's office for that last-minute call that almost never comes. In one wild case, a governor actually had himself strapped into the gurney to personally test the restraints. All right, fast forward to about 4 p.m., and we get to maybe the most famous and most mythologized part of this whole process, the tradition of the last meal. So you might be thinking they can order anything they want, right? Some huge, lavish feast? Well, not exactly. There are strict budgets. In Florida, it's capped at $40, but in Oklahoma, the limit is just $15. That doesn't exactly leave a lot of room for extravagance. But even with the limits, the choices are so telling. Some go for pure comfort food, like Ted Bundy, who asked for a traditional steak and eggs breakfast, or John Wayne Gacy, who wanted fried shrimp and KFC. Others are much simpler. Timothy McVeigh just wanted 2 pints of mint chocolate chip ice cream. And then you get these stark rejections of the whole tradition. Aline Wuornos only asked for a cup of coffee, and Angel Nevis Diaz refused a meal altogether. As evening comes, the final procedural part of the day begins. All the personal stuff is over, and the focus shifts entirely to the execution chamber.
Witnesses are brought in. This can be the victim's family, the inmate's family, journalists, and officials. Then the inmate takes that final walk, which is often just 10 feet. According to wardens, the vast majority of inmates are calm, dignified, they don't resist. There's a 5-person team on standby in case they do, but it's very rarely needed. It's described as a surprisingly clean and quiet procedure. Inside the chamber, it's like clockwork. The inmate lies on the gurney. A tie-down team comes in and secures each limb. Then a specialized team, usually not doctors, inserts the IV lines. Only after all that are the curtains opened for the witnesses to see. And finally, the warden gives the signal, and the process begins. Before that final signal, though, there is the matter of last words. But even this isn't straightforward. The rules are all over the place. In Kentucky, an inmate gets 2 minutes to speak, but in Pennsylvania, you can't say anything at all. You can only provide a written statement. The statements themselves, they range from the purely defiant, like this one, from James French right before his execution by electric chair, to the philosophical, like this Lakota Sioux phrase used by Clarence Ray Allen, all the way to moments of pure gallows humor. But even with these memorable quotes, our sources are clear. They are the exception. The vast majority of final statements are quiet goodbyes or apologies to the victims' families. And that brings us to the end of the day and the end of a life. The source material we've just walked through finishes by asking a really simple but profound question. Is this highly structured clinical procedure what these criminals deserve? It's definitely something to reflect on.